Once again, thank you for the introduction. I'd like to start by thanking the conference organizers for inviting me to present at this webinar, and I'm very happy about that. The topic I was given was to look at the global nickel and supply and demand balance, and in particular the prospects for 2021, given given the COVID-19 pandemic. I'll start by looking at sort of recent price developments and then move on to look at the fundamentals in terms of both demand and supply. Now, in terms of pricing, I mean, it's been another sort of volatile period for the nickel price. We saw prices rally from the lows in March, April, at the height of COVID-19 to above $20,000 a ton, sort of February time. Now, the rally came on the back of a number of factors. In particular, although the macro picture in terms of the fundamentals were showing an improvement, especially with the recovery in stainless production in China and then outside of China, I think there were other factors which aided the rise or the rally in the price. And we had, of course, stimulus measures being announced across many of the global economies. And many of these stimulus measures were focused on a greener economy. And I think with the EV sector, we saw a lot of investors coming into the market on the back of that as well. We had the weaker US dollar also helping to lift prices as well. But given the fundamental picture, we were concerned that prices had overstretched fundamental levels. And more recently, I think the trigger for the price correction, although it's mild in a sense, was the announcement by Tsingshan that it plans to utilize part of its nickel pig iron capacity in Indonesia to produce nickel matte. So Tsingshan has agreed to supply around 100,000 tons of nickel matte over a 1-year period starting from October. The reason why this undermined market sentiment was mainly because, the battery sector, as you see in a slide later in my presentation, is going to play an important role in nickel demand over the medium longer term. And there was a concern that potentially there was a bottleneck in terms of class 1 supply to meet this increasing demand from the battery sector. Now, with the news from Tsingshan, potentially means that we don't have this sort of bottleneck potentially to meet nickel demand from the battery sector. And I think this led to investors liquidating their long positions. And you can see that with the LME commitment of trade reports data. You can see the yellow shaded area and how that's come off with the liquidation we saw from investors, and in turn, the nickel price coming off from its highs to around 16,000. And it's been trading around that level for a month now. We have seen prices rise lately to, I think this morning, around 16,800. Once again, the potential for additional stimulus and strong demand across many of the key consuming economies. Now, as I said, we have seen a strong recovery on the stainless side. The chart on the left shows the change in stainless production. And you can see that with the impact of COVID in Q1 last year, you can see how we saw Chinese stainless production drop significantly. And in Q2, we saw a very strong rebound. Now, outside of China, we're basically a quarter behind. And you can see how ex-China stainless production was impacted in the second quarter of last year. And we have seen a strong rebound since then. In fact, global stainless production in Q1 is now above pre-COVID levels due to the rebound we've seen both in China initially, in Indonesia as well, and of course outside of China, Indonesia, in terms of Europe and North America. Now, if you look at the regional change, you can see last year, outside of China, Indonesia, global stainless production fell in many of the countries. China, we think stainless production was flat on a year-on-year basis. This is a very good, given that at the height of COVID, we were expecting Chinese stainless production to fall by around 6 to 7%. In Indonesia, we saw stainless production rise strongly by 13%. And this year, as you can see, we're expecting global stainless production to rise by over 13%, with a recovery across the board. We're looking at strong production growth once again in China and Indonesia. Indonesia, we're looking at a very strong rebound. Tsingshan, there are two main players on the Indonesian stainless side. You have Tsingshan and Virtue Dragon. And a lot of the increase in over the last 12 months has come from Virtue Dragon, which started up early last year. Virtue Dragon has around 2.5 million tons of stainless capacity, and Tsingshan has around 3 million tons of stainless capacity. A lot of this material is being exported, to China, especially in the recent months. We've seen, I think, China, has an exemption on billet imports from Indonesia, and we've seen a lot of billet exports from Indonesia to China. As I said elsewhere, we have seen a strong recovery in Europe, in America, and I think part of this is also because with COVID-19, we have seen a shift in expenditure from services to goods. And so demand for domestic appliances, for example, is very good. And this in turn has seen strong exports from China during the lockdown periods we had in Europe and America. Now, the other sector where we're seeing strong demand or recovery is from the EV sector. The two main stars of the EV sector last year were China and Europe. In China, we've had a strong start to NEV sales. NEV sales for January to February are up nearly 400%. Of course, it's a sort of a base effect given the numbers were much lower this time last year with the impact of COVID. But nonetheless, we are expecting Chinese NEV sales to add around 1.85 million units this year. In Europe, we have seen a strong EV sales picture. This has been mainly due to subsidies which came into effect, especially in the middle part of last year, with Germany, France, and the UK providing subsidies to boost EV, or support the EV sector. Of course, there is a question mark over what happens if these subsidies are removed and whether we would see some sort of slowdown. But at the moment, we are expecting strong EV sales in Europe and China this year. Now, in terms of what this means for overall consumption, you can see last year we had a decline in nickel consumption by around 2.5% due to COVID. In fact, you can see that the demand from stainless is actually flat, despite global stainless falling by around 5%. And this reflects the fact that we had strong growth in Indonesia and China, where predominantly 300 series production was grew, and that's more nickel intensive. And of course, in these two countries, there's a greater usage of primary nickel units compared to Europe and the US. Now, this year, we're expecting nickel demand to rise by around 12% on the back of, as I mentioned earlier, a strong rebound in stainless and increasing demand from the EV sector. Now, as part of our nickel coverage, we do a sort of look at the medium and longer term picture. We do provide a detailed supply-demand balance of a 5-year period. And, if we look at sort of the medium-term picture, you can see how important nickel demand from the battery sector is. So you can see that over the next 5 years, demand from the battery and the stainless sector, in terms of volume terms, is similar in magnitude. And that illustrates the increasing EV penetration we're going to see, and of course the increasing use of nickel-intensive batteries as the industry moves towards from at the moment 622, 533 chemistry towards using more of a 811 chemistry. So that's going to support nickel demand in batteries over the next couple of years as well. Now, if we turn to the supply side, Indonesia really is the focus of nickel supply. If you look at the picture last year, COVID-19, unlike some of the other base metals, we did not see a big impact on nickel supply. In fact, nickel supply grew by around 45% last year. And here, the chart on the left shows the contribution to supply, and you can see the main supply growth came from Indonesian nickel pig iron production, where we saw continued addition of new capacity. And this is not surprising when you consider the cost advantage of producing NPI in Indonesia compared to, say, China, given the Indonesian ore ban came into effect at the start of last year. So the cost of Indonesian NPI is below $8,000 a ton, and that makes it very attractive to build capacity in Indonesia. Outside of Indonesia, we saw Chinese NPI decline last year. The main reason for that was, of course, the introduction of the ore ban, leaving the Philippines the main supplier to the Chinese NPI sector. And we also saw sort of ex-NPI production sort of decline last year as well. We saw some disruptions due to COVID in Q2, but many of the operations returned to normal production by sort of in the later part of last year. And Battery, which was also impacted, has just recently restarted. So we should see some sort of supply recovery in terms of ex-NPI. Now, with this growth in nickel pig iron production last year, we saw increasing supply of class 2 material. And this led to undermine the pricing for class 2 material. So here we show the NPI price versus the LME nickel price. And you can see how the discount for NPI was as high as over $3,000. You can see in sort of December to February period. Now, with the discount last year, we have seen increasing discounts for ferronickel. At the moment, we hear ferronickel discounts range between $1,500 to $2,000 a ton. So this reflects the increasing supply of class 2 to the stainless sector, which in turn means that the use of class 1 in stainless has been declining, especially in China.
Mr. Shah, your time is, you have 3 minutes more.
Oh, okay. All right. I'll quickly rush through this. Now, as I said, Indonesia has been the main supply growth, driven by Tsingshan, Virtue Dragon, and Vida Bay. And we expect Indonesia NPI to rise to above 900,000 tons this year. Now, the other area of growth is, of course, HPAL. And I think these projects are important given that this material is required for increasing demand from the battery sector. But of course, we have seen historically how projects have suffered from cost overruns and have faced delays. I think this is an important factor to bear in mind when considering the risks surrounding the new HPAL capacity. The other issue, of course, is with the conversion of NPI to matte is the carbon footprint. I think that's going to be interesting, given that a lot of the NPI capacity is based on coal-based power. But of course, Tsingshan has announced plans to invest in significant renewable power capacity over the next couple of years, and that's going to be interesting to watch as well. In terms of nickel sulfate prices, we are seeing a big premium for nickel sulfate at over $3,000 a ton, reflecting the strong demand from the EV sector. And this in turn means that the demand for briquettes is very high. And we've seen very high premiums for nickel briquettes, especially in China. So to summarize, I know we're very short of time. We do expect overall the nickel market to remain in surplus. We have a surplus last year of around 130, 140,000 tons. We expect the surplus this year to be around 50,000 tons. And at the moment, I mean, given the demand is strong for Q2 seasonally as well, I think in the second half, we do expect prices to ease from these sort of current levels. Because this year, we're expecting the nickel price to average around $16,000 a ton. So I'll end my presentation, and I look forward to any questions we have later on.